This video is about reading from and writing to Excel spreadsheets. There are two operators that are used to read from and write data to an Excel spreadsheet. Almost everyone uses Excel as a way of processing data, so it's important to be able to use these operators. We'll look at key parameters to the read Excel operator, key parameters to the write Excel operator. We'll also touch on writing to and reading from the repository, and there are some points to watch which I'll bring out. So as usual, we have a process, and I've created a view to make it all possible to show in one screen. So the process is here, parameters here, results here. As you can see, there are actually a number of operators in use here, but the read and write Excel operators are these ones here, that one, and that one. But I'm also illustrating the use of file objects by using the write file and open file operators. We might as well touch on those first. So basically, when reading an Excel spreadsheet, you can, and in fact you probably usually will, just read it directly from somewhere in the file system. This is what this one is doing. We'll look at the detail of this in a minute, but anyway, for the time being, you can see that what's happening here is the Excel spreadsheet is being read and it's being parsed. The output from that is then being passed to a write Excel operator. Now this, in real life you probably wouldn't do this. This is just to illustrate the point. So the read Excel output is essentially an example set, and this example set is input to the write Excel operator here. The write Excel operator, normally you would probably just write that as a file to the file system, but you can additionally, and you can see it's happening here, write it to a file using the write file operator. And in that situation you use the file object output here, which I'm moving my mouse up and down now. And when you do that, you can either write it as a file, or what I'm doing here, writing it as a repository entry. So I simply I select repository blob entry here. I'm giving it a name, simple book, in my repository somewhere, and I'm choosing the MIME type as that one there, application VND MS Excel. That will have the effect of creating a repository entry corresponding to my spreadsheet. Then later on, I'm actually opening it here in the same process. You can check that it's in this order by using this execution order button. So the open file operator, now I'm selecting the entry called simple book in my repository, which happens to be a spreadsheet, and this opens the file, and then it's an object that can then be passed to the read Excel operator. In this situation, the read Excel operator no longer has a file name as an option, because it's already got all it needs to parse the data. You'll also see that in addition you can actually have this here. This is where you pass in from the process context a repository entry essentially, which will then go directly to the read Excel operator, and you will do that if you want to run this as part of a rapid analytics process, or you can do it using the execute process operator where parameters can be passed in. But for now I shan't do that. And now we'll move into more detail on the read and write Excel operators. So firstly, the read Excel operator, so this is reading a file, there's no file input, and you basically give it the location of a file. I'm on a Windows machine, so there we are. It's called simplebook.xlsx. This means it's the latest version of Excel. I think it's actually the latest, last but one. It is possible to read XLS files. I won't show it in this, slightly less functionality, so might as well just use the most modern. I'm assuming everyone has that. If not, you can import XLS files, and it's much the same actually. So anyway, having decided that you know where your file is, you then can fill in various parameters such as which sheet you want from the Excel spreadsheet, the range, Encoding, I just leave that as blank. First row is names. That normally is defaulted to true, I think, but as you'll see shortly, I'm going to be using the wizard here, so this will cause that all to be filled in for me. Annotations, this lets you annotate where your data's from. I tend to leave that alone. Date format, you can, if you want, describe the hours, minutes, seconds, months, day format that you expect to see in the spreadsheet to give RapidMiner a hint as to how to decode it. Time zone, I've set that to GMT. This is a gotcha point. We must come back to that later. Local, well, I'm in the UK. The key point is going to be this: the edit list values here. This is the metadata information that maps Excel spreadsheet rows to attributes and examples in the RapidMiner example set. Now, I click on that, you can see it's very similar to the read CSV actually, and you can just fill these in laboriously by yourself if you want. So you're seeing here that there's a column in the spreadsheet. I want to see it in my example set. I want it to be an integer, and it's a regular, and the name has been filled in for me. I can override that. In fact, all of these, when we look at the spreadsheet, you'll see it's exactly the same in the spreadsheet. So essentially what we're building up to now is running the wizard, which does all this for you. One final thing, not matching is missing, so it's sometimes worth selecting that to ensure that any missing data is flagged. That tends not to be such a problem with spreadsheets, to be honest. Anyway, let's run the wizard, which will essentially allow us to fill most of these parameters in without having to worry too much. So here we go, here's the wizard. So the spreadsheet's already been filled in, and the first screen you get to is the tab, the first tab it encounters in the spreadsheet. Now, if my spreadsheet had multiple tabs, I think they would appear here, and I could actually, I think, select the one I want, and I would highlight the cells I want. So in this situation, I'm just going to highlight the whole lot. This, by the way, is a gotcha. We'll come back to that later. So I've highlighted the cells I want in the spreadsheet. Next, this is where you can put an annotation in if you want. So essentially, this will cause an annotation to be associated with the data to say these are the names of the attributes. Next, this is the real meat of the operator. Now what we're seeing is the wizard has guessed what the types and names of the attributes are, and I'm using the first 111 rows. There is a configuration setting in the GUI. It defaults to 100. In the read CSV video, I showed how you can sometimes get into trouble if you don't read enough rows, so I've unilaterally changed it to a higher number to illustrate the point. The same will no doubt apply to Excel. What that means is if you have read in 100 rows, and for example in those 100 rows you only see two values, say true or false, then RapidMiner would legitimately assume that's a binomial attribute. If, however, it was not true or false, it was red or green, then it may conclude that that's binomial. What happens if the 101st row is another colour completely? Then that would lead to an error when the real data itself is read in. So anyway, what I tend to do is set that to a slightly higher value and be on the guard for binomials, where you sometimes have to take a bit of action just to make sure that it's really the type you're after. Anyway, you can see it's done a reasonably good job. So it's thought the first column, they're integers, the next column is reals, string, fair enough. Last column is date and time, and it's actually correctly has set that to be a date and time type. And we've basically finished. So that means the read Excel operator will now read everything in, and we might as well just run it and see what we get. So if I do run, go back to the nice view. So basically here is the spreadsheet that I've read in. Now of course I will now bring in the actual spreadsheet. So after a bit of clicking around, here's the spreadsheet, and let's look at the example set. Get the spreadsheet back. Okay. Try to make things line up so we don't have too much eye strain. So you can see that basically everything matches up. The first gotcha is this date import. You can see in the original spreadsheet all of these dates were set to something like 7 in the evening. When you look at the imported version of that, you'll notice a time zone has been added, and some of the 7 o'clock in the evenings have become 6 o'clock. Now this is a daylight saving time transition. In the UK it usually happens around the end of March and around the end of October. So you can see obviously the night of the 27th, between the 27th and the 28th, GMT obviously never changes, but summertime does. So I think the interpretation of this is what you're seeing in the spreadsheet is a daylight saving time. And then what happens in RapidMiner is that it interprets that as a time in daylight saving time, and then takes away the hour if needed, in this case to make GMT. It's, I think, correct, but you've just got to know it happens in case of subtle issues if you're doing lots and lots of data processing as time zone boundaries go past. So now we'll continue and we will write the Excel file out again. In fact, it'll just overwrite the existing one, but very simple actually. So the input to the write Excel operator is the example set, and you say which format you want. You can choose XLS or XLSX. I've chosen the more modern one. You can give a sheet name. If you choose XLS, all that disappears. You get fewer options. XLS, you get some new options, of which the first is this sheet name. Fair enough. You could put that whatever you like there. You could probably even put a macro in there if you wanted. The next one is the date format. This, I think, is an advanced parameter, but I believe it dictates how the date is displayed in Excel. And that means essentially you can have a certain amount of flexibility how you want to order years, months, days, hours, minutes, and so on, which is quite cool. And then this last parameter, in the help it claims to be to do with dates, but it's actually a number format. So you'll see when I write this out and we look at the spreadsheet what that actually means. So what I'll do is I'll set a breakpoint after the write Excel and run the process. And there were two outputs from the write Excel. The bottom one is the file object, but the top one is this example set here. So it looks very familiar to the one before, and now you can see how the number format affects the number display. So it's basically doing it to 3 decimal places, and I'm sure with a bit more time and research you could do all sorts of weird wonderful things there. That's slightly more advanced though than I think is worth going into now, and to be honest it's more than I know about. Okay, so let's move to the next operators. So we did talk about write file, we did talk about open file. Let's quickly look at this read Excel operator, which is now taking a file rather than a file directly from the file system. It's taking a file from the repository, but essentially it's the same as the previous read Excel operator. So if I run this, what we should see is an identical copy of what we wrote out. Let's see if that's true. So read Excel from repository, there is the example set that I've read out. If I do this tab here, you can see that actually, yep, they're the same. Let's finally look at the types of the attributes that have come out. So it doesn't make any difference, they're both the same. So let's look at here, the statistics view. What I'll do is I'll move this somewhere a bit easier to read, and that'll do. And I'll get rid of the parameters. So what you're seeing here is the statistics or metadata view for the attributes. So basically the types of the attributes are actually pretty good. RapidMiner has a much better chance of getting the types correct. Not that it really gets them wrong, but because Excel is a very rich environment, I guess it must be able to get good information from the Excel environment, and from that set the types of the attributes correctly. So you can see the integer, yes indeed they were numbers just without any decimal places. The numerics are decimal values or have numbers after the decimal place. Polynomial, some people get confused by the difference between polynomial and nominal, and I'm one of them. I actually think there's no difference. I can't find any practical difference. I'm sure a real deep expert in the code would say, but I've always found that polynomial and nominal, they're basically the same. But anyway, the basic message is it's a string and it has a number of allowable values. And date and time, that's the actual correct type for the date attribute. So that's, again, it's correctly interpreted the string as a date, which is good. Okay, so finally what I'll do is I'll just reset this view to be something usable, and we'll run it again. I'll also put the parameter view back in. And what we'll do is we'll cycle through the read Excel parameters, there they are, and the write Excel parameters. I'll also just click on the data and statistics views so you can align yourself